we'll see if it's working now. Are we live? Are we live? It says starting.
I mean, I haven't seen anything, but...
Now it says live. It says we're live.
Well, I keep refreshing and nothing's popping up.
Well, you should try now. So I think that the stream is going. And if that's the case, I'm going to switch over to the encoder. So we can talk to people.
I don't know where to see it. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, it's live. Cool. All right. Hello, Internet. We are doing a live stream while we are under COVID-19 quarantine. As I mentioned on our YouTube social media. I don't know what the name for that thing is, where you post YouTube posts, community posts. That we're under quarantine due to possible exposure, but we're both feeling great and have no symptoms, so
we're under self-isolation.
We're under self-isolation. Anna has corrected me that we are.
MTG Viking says, "Yo,
what up?" Glad to have you. I hope y'all can hear Anna. She is just in the background off camera checking chat, and she'll update me on what's going on. So we're in self-isolation, trying to slow community spread, and we had been planning on doing a maple wine anyhow, and so we put it to the YouTube viewers to vote and let us know what they wanted us to brew on a live stream, and maple wine is the thing that was chosen. So we are kind of new to live streaming in this way, so there's a lot of technical pieces set up, and we're using OBS, and so we're doing it with a few software solutions. So let us know if anything appears out of sorts so we can try and fix it while we're streaming. But we're going to go ahead and start, and if you've got questions or if you want to holler at me in the chat, like MTG Viking, throw some comments in the chat. But we have to start by rehydrating our yeast. And so I attempted best I could to make sure I had all of the stuff in here to do this with. So there's one fresh out of the dishwasher, sanitized mason jar, and we're going to be using QA23 yeast from Lalvin. And the reason we're using this yeast is because it's what I've got on hand right now. We've got a ton of yeast in the fridge, but I didn't want to use D47 for a maple wine because I feel like it's more of a mead-centric yeast, and this one is supposed to deal well with fructose, which maybe you can Google and let me know how much fructose is in maple syrup. I don't know if there's a nutrition facts on here. There is, but it only lists sugars, and it says there are a lot of them. So we're going to use this yeast, and we're just going to rehydrate it with Go Firm.
So this might burst your bubble, but this random article says that maple syrup is 98% sucrose.
98% sucrose.
Below 2% of glucose and fructose.
Well, I'm sure it'll be fine. The good thing is those are all fermentable sugars. So apparently it is 98% sucrose, and then just a wee little bit of glucose and fructose. So sucrose is a complex sugar, right?
Yeah, because it's one part glucose and one part fructose.
Yeah,
right?
Science. Yeah, I think that's how it goes. If we're wrong, I'm sure Chad will let us know. So the QA23 is going in, and we're gonna rehydrate that with Go Firm. And y'all probably saw what?
Jeffrey Ragsdale says, live stream, woot.
Oh, hi Jeff. Thank you for tuning in. Where was I at? Go Firm?
Sure.
Go Firm. Oh, yeah. You probably saw the top 10 hacks video where I say to put everything in mason jars. My Go Firm has not yet been transferred to a mason jar because I'm waiting for one of these little guys like this to open up, and most of our mason jars are huge. They're like the big
quart size.
Yeah, big boy size. So we're going to use Go Firm, and for this we're going to use about 5 grams to rehydrate. And I had been previously, if you've seen the other videos, using this very large kitchen scale. And this scale is great for things that are more than a few ounces, but it's not great down to the grams. And on the homebrewing sub on Reddit, recently somebody found a deal for this little dude. It's like $8, and it is super accurate down to the gram. So we are going to be using this to measure out our Go Firm. I lost it in front. So the way I do this typically is just to turn it on, grab the lid from the mason jar that I'm working with, set it on there and hit the tare to zero it out, and then pour. The Go Firm is great and does a really great job of getting the yeast ready to ferment, but it is really smelly. It's not as bad as the squid ink pasta that we made the other day, which finally went into bags today. It was smelling pretty rough in our dining room for a while. It's got a little bit of a spill. Squid ink has got what Anna described as kind of like a fish food, like a goldfish food smell. I think that's relatively accurate. And so we'd not had squid ink pasta. So since we're in isolation, we decided to order some on Amazon and make pasta out of it. And it was very inky and very delicate pasta dough.
It was like Play-Doh.
Yeah, it was like Play-Doh. And we used our brand new pasta extruder that Anna got me for my birthday to extrude that pasta. And made some fusilli out of it. We haven't eaten it yet. So. And we may not. There's this really great pasta book. I've mentioned it before on the channel. It's called Making Artisan Pasta. And it's got basically every beginner pasta recipe that you could ever need when you're learning how to make pasta. So I'd recommend checking that out, particularly because there's a Kindle version of it, so it's searchable. And so it makes it really easy to find recipes for whatever it is you're wanting to make. And they had a squid ink version. The squid ink pasta is supposed to use absinthe, which we did not have.
That could have been the savior. Could have made it better.
I mean, we haven't eaten it yet. Could be just fine. So I'm using some of the brewing water here. This is spring water. So it tastes good. It's good tasting water. Got a added mineral content, so there's some good flavor there, and we know it's sterile because it came in the bottle.
Okay, we have 2 questions.
2 questions. While
Ever...
you're reading those, I'm going to shake this up to mix in a little bit of oxygen and get everything kind of combined.
Have you ever had anything like this beverage before? Because I have found fermented to dry, it doesn't taste like you would expect.
That makes sense.
NTG Becking.
I've not had maple wine before, and in talking to people this week about making it, a lot of folks had a similar reaction, that it tastes kind of woody, and mostly what I read is that it takes a couple of years for it to get past kind of a bottle shock phase. So it may be a while before we pull out bottles of this. There are some recommendations, and we'll talk about recipe here in a minute. There are some recommendations for various adjuncts or additives like oak chips or tannin, things like that to round out the flavor. But there's not a lot of information on making maple wine, which is weird because you would think maple wine would be like a real common, like northern prepper kind of. No. So no, the answer is I haven't had it. I have a feeling that it'll need some slight back sweetening if we can get it to go dry. I think this is going to end up at about 10% alcohol. If my calculations are right, we'll look at the hydrometer reading. So we'll have probably some room to back sweeten it, but we'll see.
David McCauley asked, what's the washed yeast being used? But are you using a...
We're not using wash yeast for this. This is QA23. It is a fairly accessible yeast. It's a white wine yeast. My understanding from colleagues online is that it does a great job of fermenting fructose, and it does a great job of producing fruity flavors, typically in tropical meads and wines. It's what I had on hand. I think the only other wine yeast that I had right now was EC1118, and I didn't want to use something like that because I want a steady fermentation. I don't want to obliterate any of the delicate flavors in the maple syrup. So no washed yeast for this. I had considered using Kveik Voss because I still have several vials of that in the fridge, but my concern is that in my testing with Kveik, it has flavor contributions, and I would like to know what this tastes like with a relatively neutral yeast contribution. So this should hopefully accentuate the flavors that are in there without contributing too many new ones, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I don't know how to pronounce this word necessarily. John Johnson said, I made an
Acerglyn, yeah.
Last year, back sweetened to 1.010 with more syrup. I used an oak spiral and vanilla beans. Absolutely delicious.
Yeah? What, if I can ask, is John?
John Johnson.
John Johnson. John, if I could ask, what was your ratio of maple syrup to honey in that? I mean, was it like a 50-50? No.
We'll see.
We'll see. I don't know why I expected an immediate reaction. Okay, so while we're doing this, I felt like it was important that we talk about other things that we've done on the channel. And one of our more popular videos, and it seems to be gaining in popularity, hopefully that leads to a trend because this is a really cool thing that people can make at home, was jam wine. And this is one of our bottles, as yet unopened, of Apricot Jam Wine that we made on the channel. And you should, once this feed is over, go check out the video of that and the follow-up video. This was made probably 6-7 months ago, something like that. I think it was the end of summer. And it's made from apricot jam.
John says he will look it up. Please hold.
Awesome, holding. So apricot jam wine, this is using a batch label. We talked about that on one of our videos. These labels we get from Vistaprint. They are address labels, and they are super easy to take off, like basically a little bit of OxyClean or a run through the dishwasher, and the label comes right off. So it's not fancy, it's not glitzy, but it tells you what's in the bottle and does the job. So this is not really the right kind of glass for a white wine, but it's what's available.
What would be the right kind of glass?
Probably some, so this isn't, I should preface that. This isn't really the right kind of glass for any wine. So for a red wine, typically you want a glass where the heat of your hand is going to heat up the wine. For a white wine, I would prefer a glass with less air up here because I'm going to drink this glass over the course of this video, and it will get exposed to too much air while I am consuming it. If I was pounding this, it would be fine, but I would prefer a glass more in line with the pour, so a smaller is essentially what I'm saying, a smaller glass.
Okay. Jeffrey Ragsdale says, I'm making an Acerglyn Sizer right now for my friend's wedding.
That's a lot of things. That's cool. So are you doing no water and all apple juice in that Acerglyn Sizer? Curious. Bonus question, is it home pressed apple juice? Because that would be legit. So this is an apricot jam wine. It fermented dry, and as I recall, I don't believe I back sweetened this.
All cider.
Nice. Well done. It's very warm in our house, I'm noticing. So we've got this, when we moved into this home, we set up this spare room as the film studio. And so we've got all these lights and all of this like insulatedness around here. I'm just feeling very warm.
Okay, John Johnson says...
Damn, that's good.
It says 3 pounds honey, 4 pounds of maple step fed.
Got it.
Then roughly 1 pound of maple for back sweetening.
Wow, nice. So did that come out fairly sweet, I'm guessing? This apricot jam wine tastes like dried apricots. It's got a real kind of tannic bite to it, very light. No heat. It's really calmed down. You might think Anna doesn't drink wine, so you might you might think this is unpleasant. You should try this though. Give it a sip. What do you think?
Thank you.
Huh?
I said no, thank you.
Yeah, Anna's not a wine drinker.
Okay.
This is very atypical for a white wine though. It's definitely has the flavor of apricot there, and it's nice and kind of in the front.
You got 2 conversations happening now. Jeff says,
Whoops.
It is not home pressed, but I'm going to put it on Granny Smith apples this weekend.
All right.
And John says, fairly sweet, balanced well with the tannins from the oak.
Nice. All right. And so that's one of the things that I'm curious about in making this is whether or not oak is going to be necessary, or if the woodiness from the maple trees actually will come through in the maple syrup. So let's look at the recipe we're going to use, and I can do that because I've got this fancy software that lets me put things on the screen. So here's our recipe. It is 1 gallon. I feel like I should. Is it on the screen?
It is on the screen.
Okay.
There's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah, that's fine. So there's 1 gallon of maple syrup. That is this. We purchased this on Etsy. It was not cheap, so I hope this turns out to be really delicious. I think it was about 65 or 70 bucks shipped for 1 gallon. And this is from Vermont, and it is grade B. It is supposedly a dark maple syrup. We have not actually gotten into it yet, so I'm kind of hyped for that. So it's 1 gallon of maple syrup. We are going to use 2 grams of wine tannin. And so we talked earlier about how there's not a lot of information on the internet about making maple wine. There's a lot of questions from people asking about how to make maple wine. And there's some references to Jack Keller. Jack Keller is a brilliant winemaker, and I've been following his fruit wine recipes since I started home brewing about 11 years ago now. And when I was first starting out, Jack Keller's website was like a go-to bookmark for learning how to make fruit wines. And so it's kind of like the internet holy book for making country fruit wines. So I would encourage you to make a pilgrimage there at some point and hit that bookmark so you can keep an eye on Jack Keller's stuff. Jack Keller's site has a recipe for maple sap wine that it has added sugar to get the gravity to the projected starting gravity, but it does not, as far as I could find, have a maple wine recipe from maple syrup. And so I looked at Homebrewing Talk and Reddit and all over the place and couldn't find anything, but consistently what I saw was that it does need some rounding out with tannin. And so we are going to use 2 grams of wine tannin. There's a lot of different kinds of wine tannin. We are going to be using this. This is a very old bottle that has been added to over the years, but this is a chestnut wine tannin made for red wines. And you can also find what's called a soft wine tannin made for white wines. This type of tannin is really good for making adjustments to meads, particularly hydromels and traditional meads, because it doesn't really add anything that is going to detract from the honey, but what it does is it rounds out the mouthfeel. And what that's like in a hydromel is giving you a sense that the mead is coating your palate, coating your tongue. And because sometimes a hydromel can feel watery, it can feel thin and loose, and just adding a little bit, like this is 3 grams. You could probably add 1.5 to 2 grams for a 5-gallon batch of hydromel, something that you're brewing up to 7 or 8% alcohol, and get away with it just fine. I would use this. But if you watched our recent hydromel video, I used red wine tannin for ours, and it works just fine. It's kind of a pick your poison situation. So we're going to be using red wine tannin for this. Are there any more comments or chat stuff that we should look at?
So Jeff asked John, they've excluded you.
I'm out of this. All right.
What he thinks about possibly putting it on oak chips.
Nice.
And then MTG Viking just said, I made what I call a Boyser Glen.
Okay. Spell it.
BOCYSERGLYN.
Okay. What is this?
This winter with caramelized Michigan wildflower honey and some non-caramelized basswood honey.
Wow.
Fresh pressed apple cider from Michigan, as well as some and maple syrup.
Man, that's one of those that's like hard to replicate because all of your ingredients are kind of specific to their origin.
Yeah, Friend's Farm in Michigan, back sweetened with more of the maple, might be favorite thing I've made so far.
Wow.
Okay, so it says Boyser Glen.
Boyser Glen.
Yeah, that
Got
makes, because it's a bochet. Okay.
Got it. Oh.
Yeah.
Creative. I like it. All right. Back to our ingredients. We got water to 5 gallons. Again, this is spring water and Go Firm. We are rehydrating our yeast with Go Firm, which reminds me I should give that another shake. Again, we're just shaking this to combine, but also to mix some oxygen in there so the yeast can start their synthesis, because oxygen is required for yeast synthesis. And yeast synthesis is what the yeast are doing when they're eating your fermentable sugars and pooping out alcohol and carbon dioxide. All right, so, there we go. So, we've got, also we're going to use Fermade O for nutrient. We're going to be following kind of a modified TOSNA schedule. That's a staggered nutrient schedule. We prefer using Fermade O, even though it's a little bit more expensive, than using any of the combined methods or Fermade K, because it seems to do the job and it's one thing. So we'll be doing probably around 6 grams every 24 hours for the first 72 hours. So as the yeast goes in today, it will go in just with Go Firm, and then this time tomorrow we'll add our first addition of nutrient. Fermade O is really smelly. Have you smelled this?
No.
It stinks. It smells like something you get at a feed store, which makes sense, I guess, because it's food. So Fermade O is what we're going to use. The thing about Fermade O is it is just a jar full of nucleation sites. And so when you add Fermade O, or really any yeast nutrient, diammonium phosphate is also a big offender, into something that is fermenting, you will get a gusher if you don't use preventative measures. There's 2 different preventative measures you can use. You can degas the mead before you add it, which is time consuming. But degassing is beneficial for some types of meads during the fermentation process because CO2 is acidic. It's carbonic acid. And that acid can alter the pH to make your must more acidic. And the more acid that's in your must, the more difficult time your yeast are going to have going through synthesis, surviving, thriving, and replicating. So ideally, you would degas in a mead that's relatively acidic, if you're going to do a really robust citrus mead, or if you're doing something with tart cherries. Degassing helps get rid of some of that carbonic acid, so your pH will go back into a more survivable range. So that's a great practice to have, usually. The other thing you could do, which is what I do, is the lazy way out, and that is put a little bit of your yeast nutrient into a small bottle of sterile water and shake it up until it becomes a slurry, and then pour that into the fermenter, and then those nucleation sites are already holding on to water molecules because of what's the thing where water forms a surface tension. Because
I'm sorry.
You're looking at me like you have no clue what I'm talking about.
I actually know.
Yeah, I figured. So the water is adhered to those nucleation sites, so as you pour it in, the CO2 can't grab onto them and fizz up and foam out. And then QA23 yeast, did I mention that? Yeah, we have QA23 right here. So I'm going to get this recipe off the screen like that. So our yeast is rehydrating. We are going to start by measuring out our tannin. And we're going to do that with the same little scale. I would really, really, really recommend getting this scale. It's super great. Because it's so accurate. And I've got to remind myself, did I say 2 grams? 2 grams. Fortunately, I can see myself on here. So we're going to use 2 grams of tannin, and again, this, as per the internet, is to round out the flavor of, oh, almost nailed it, the flavor profile on the palate. Also, there are a lot of folks recommending fruiting maple wines with a little bit of citrus juice or citrus zest. I'm not opposed to that, but the more I have made country fruit wines and meads, the more I've become a fan of adjusting acid on the back end and using specific acids for specific needs. And so you could use malic acid if you want kind of a round acid. You could use lactic acid if you want a soft acid. You could use citric acid if you want an acid that's bright and fresh. Or there are acid blends that you can get if you're just starting out and you want to know what it's like just to add acid into your must without like the accompanying fruit flavors. I chose not to put any fruit or acid in here. I would rather add the acid once it's clear and we can see how the acid affects the flavor and see what kind of acid we might want to use in it to adjust the flavor for optimal performance. It's not COVID. That we know of. That is just allergies. So presumably, we did some yard work. So the wine tannin goes in. And now I'm going to open up the maple syrup.
Could we make acid?
Like, could we make acid at home?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess theoretically, what do they call it? Titration, where you take an acidic substance and you add certain compounds to it that cause the acid to form crystals and drop to the bottom. I mean, it's like making sugar candy, sugar crystals.
Yeah.
But with acid. I don't know where do we start with? Do we like juice a bunch of lemons?
Sounds like something we need to figure out.
That would be really doing the most.
In case you were wondering, John says to Jeff that he thinks that oak chips would be great, but he's not sure if they'd be better or worse than the spirals he used.
Interesting.
Probably functionally the same.
Yeah, so from my experience, and I've only used oak spirals I think twice, and it was long ago, and it was in an Apfelwein, I believe is how it's pronounced. It's an apple wine. An oak spiral is a piece of oak that has been cut into a spiral pattern to expose extra surface area. The interior of that typically is then sold as chips or as oak dust. All of these are for homebrewing purposes. The oak spiral is nice because you can like tie a thread around it, sanitize the whole thing, and dunk it in. And like if you've got an airlock like this, you can leave it in there, do taste tests. When you like it, you just pull the oak spiral back out rather than having to rack off of it, which is nice. Oak chips, the real difference, I think that they work functionally the same. The real difference between oak spirals and oak chips is oak spirals are slow release and oak chips are fast. So something that, especially if it's a higher alcohol content, like in the 15 to 18% range, that alcohol is going to help leach those oak tannins out and the vanillins in the oak. And so something that you put chips in may be oaked in 2 or 3 days, whereas spirals may be 2 or 3 weeks. And so you have more time to get it right with a spiral than versus chips. But I am a real tannin head. I'm a real hop head too. We should try this hops candy later. It's made from hop extract. I know Anna would love that. She really likes her IBUs. I really like tannin, and so I tend to go all in on oak. If you saw our blueberry mead video, it was heavily oaked. I think 3/4 of a pound of oak went into it, and I think it's perfect. So I ain't concerned, but you may not like so much heft in your Acer blends.
So, kind of segueing. MTG Viking asks, do you prefer liquid or powder tannins? They like, I don't know their gender, they like the liquid so that they can add after the fact while adjusting acids.
That's interesting. I've not tried liquid tannin. I've always used powdered. But I've also, as you can tell, I've taken to doing it gradually over the course of the ferment. So we started with 2 grams here. We may add 1 gram later. We may add 5 grams later. So I'm a fan of adjusting as you go. I think that's an interesting concept. It's something that's worth a try. Do you have a brand that you recommend we could check out? Because that would be cool. This is really interesting maple syrup. This is, so I've been tempted to buy honey on Etsy a number of times, and it's very expensive. And maple syrup obviously is very expensive too. But in like trusted source things, knowing that I know exactly where this maple syrup came from in the world and who made it, and they shipped it directly to my door, is kind of comforting. And so this is, I love the branding on
really
this.
Cute little owl.
Little owl. And the owl's name is Emma, a barred owl. And Emma says that you should make wise choices and buy local, which there's not a lot of local maple syrup here in Oklahoma City, if any.
Yeah, that we know of.
We do have quite a few apiaries. So there's at the farmers markets. At the farmers markets, there's always honey to purchase. Anna is using one of the brew boxes as a footrest.
It's paint.
Paint boxes. So, Anna, would you like to try?
Yeah, I love sugar.
Some maple syrup.
Do I have to get up?
No, I'll bring it to you.
Okay, I just didn't know if it was going to make a mess.
Nah. It's quite runny, which is good. I was worried that it was going to glop. So I'm also a big fan of keeping chopsticks in the house. They're useful for lots of things. I think in homebrewing, I mostly find them useful for taste testing things, sticking them in honey or apparently maple syrup to see what they taste like. They're also great for retrieving a hydrometer that you've stuck into a carboy and can't get back out.
That's really good. It's got like a really complex maple syrup flavor, but like a deep. It's good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like almost like it's caramelized, but it's not. It just came out of the
That's
tree.
Interesting. So in Oklahoma, we're used to Griffin's. Griffin's pancake syrup, which is, I think, all high fructose corn syrup. Don't taste like this. Oh, that's really great. I'm a big fan. Okay, so this could get messy. Hopefully it doesn't. I didn't bring the funnel in here because I felt like all this stuff was going to be relatively pourable. What I am going to do is get my microphone out of the way. What's going on in the chat?
You have really good timing. MTG Viking just said that they like, or they, LD Carlson liquid wine tannin is
perfect.
what I use.
And that is purchasable on Amazon, I'm presuming, because there's lots of LD Carlson stuff on Amazon. And it's probably, in these strange times, it's probably available at your local homebrew shop, which you should patronize if they are open. I saw a lot of shops like that, even if they're not open, are doing curbside pickup right now. Comic book stores here in Oklahoma City are even doing curbside pickup.
It's a really pretty color.
You don't want to miss out on what's happening with Batman and Robin just because you're in self-isolation. It is really pretty. It smells really good.
Do they have smaller
They
quantities?
sure do. So this cellar, I think the gallon size, is the largest that they sold. And here's one thing I will say about them. They had free shipping. So the other ones were around the same price range, but wanted like $15, $20 for shipping.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
there was free shipping, which was cool. They sold them, I think, in pints, half gallons, and gallons, if I remember correctly. And I bet there was an 8-ounce option too. Samantha, the Wonder Dog, has joined us.
We should get some, just like for breakfast.
For pancakes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We made pancakes once and used the buckwheat honey that we use for our buckwheat braggot that is made with Kveik yeast. And we had a little leftover buckwheat honey. So it's great for pancakes. I bet that was really loud on the stream. Okay, so one thing that you should always do when making maple wine or making mead is rinse out your jug, because there's no sense in wasting what's left in here, you know? So I do that by adding a little bit of water and giving it a healthy shake. You know, we set up for this live stream. It took a little while. It took about an hour and a half to get everything set up. And beforehand, we were talking about how complex it was to set up just to mix some water and maple syrup together. But we'd like to, I think, do other live streams. I'm curious what kinds of things y'all would like to see. Are you interested in seeing braggots, like something that's got a pretty long, like, mash and boil and all of that, or mead heavy content? It seemed like nobody wanted to see me make pasta.
Yeah, who cares?
We make a lot of pasta these days. And it's kind of nice to have so much pasta around the house, because when you can't go grocery shopping or when the grocery store shelves are empty, it's nice to be able to have pasta ready to go. You know, we did an Instacart order today since we're not supposed to leave the house. And bread flour was on our shopping list, and the store is still sold out a week later of bread flour. So maybe one good thing about all of this is folks are learning how to make bread at home. Our old house used to be right next to a bread factory.
Oh, Jeff says his wife is boycotting flour. He wants to make pasta, but...
Boycotting flour? Is she gluten intolerant? Should I ask?
You have.
I have
said
asked.
It out loud.
Said it out loud.
It's frustrating. That was the end of the comment.
Got it. There are other flours you can use to make pasta. In my experience eating it, I've never tried it. I don't think we've ever tried pasta not from wheat flour.
No,
those
it
pastas
should-
suck.
Gluten. We had
Yeah.
We got
Not good.
we got a chickpea flour pasta that was already. We didn't make it. He said she's on some weird diet.
I get that. Well, you know, Jeff, was it?
Yeah.
The great
Jeffrey.
The great thing about pasta is you can make a ton of it and dry it out, and then when she is done with her diet, you'll have lots and lots of pasta to experiment with. Yeah? However, I would not suggest drying homemade pasta verde, because we did that once and it molded in the package, which was a real bummer. Maybe it should have gone in the freezer or something, but not necessarily shelf stable, the pasta verde. We have these cool bags that we put our pasta in. These are available online, and they're nice because there's plenty of room to label them up here. This one's not labeled, but I know this is what? This is duck egg pasta. We made this with duck eggs from the local Asian supermarket.
Which we decided was not any better.
Yeah, I don't think it was any better. I think I think the real issue with the duck eggs was duck eggs have seemingly a higher water content, and so I was struggling with the chemistry balance of the pasta dough. I ended up having to add a little bit more flour, and then I ended up having to add more yolks, not the whites, but the yolks, and so it turned out fine. But these bags are cool. And friends really love receiving gifts of pasta in these cool bags.
Jeffrey says that that's not a bad idea. LOL.
So, we gotta make sure everything's sanitized. You probably noticed that this was full of stars and foam when we started. There's still a little bit living on top here. To differentiate my sanitizer from everything else in the house, because I usually keep a gallon of it, I like to make sure that this is marked, as it can be a real bummer if you thought you were pouring water into something and it was sanitizer. I've tasted sanitizer a few times that way, and so I've learned this skill.
Andrew Bays says, "Good evening."
There are a lot of O's in it?
Yeah, there's some extra O's.
Cool.
I don't know if they were intentional or not, but...
I'm here for it. Don't mind me, I'm just stabbing into this jug.
Oh.
It's fine.
Oh.
Everything's good. Everything's fine. That's why we keep towels around. Was there more commentary?
No, no.
Oh, just a good evening.
Just
okay.
a good evening.
I thought good evening was the start to something else.
No, I think he just joined.
Okay, good evening. We are making maple wine, and I am sanitizing the floor really quick. You may have seen from our Instagram or our YouTube stream that we had an incident recently with by the way, the reason I was doing this was to sanitize this spoon. We had an incident recently where a carboy cracked randomly, and it was for the pineapple mead that the channel voted that we brew. Came home, heard a clinking noise, walked in here, and there was pineapple mead leaking out of the bottom of the carboy and that nice big crack in it. All that is to say, no matter how much I cleaned, the floors are still quite sticky back here. So some sanitizer on the floor is no big deal. Just do a little cleaning while we stream.
Andrew says, "LOL, just saying hi. Hope this one comes out well."
I hope it comes out well too, because
it's kind of ominous.
It's kind of like the other commenter was saying. It's one of those, like, if you haven't tried it, how do you know to invest in it type of things? How do you know to stick $65, $70 worth of ingredients into a thing? Particularly an ingredient like this that is so delicious. And I might just turn it into Garbo in here. We'll see. So I've sanitized our spoon, which was already sanitized before we started anyway, but one more round of sanitizing.
It looks like cola.
It looks more like root beer than the root beer that we have sitting over there, actually. The root beer video has been deleted. I'm going back to the drawing board on that recipe because it still is just not right. So I decided it's not worth putting it out. There are quite a few YouTube channels out there that do brewing content. And when I say quite a few, I also acknowledge there are quite a few that don't test their recipes and just make something and then slap a how-to title on there. That's bad practice. Because that's how you get to doing a tasting video and somebody tastes it and thinks it's awful and has to pretend that it tastes good because you already told YouTube this is how you make it. So we do quite a bit of recipe testing, particularly when we're doing something weird like a root beer from roots. And so we started with a birch beer extract in the first round. That's in a keg and it's not good. So we're probably we could do a ceremonial dumping of the keg in the street or something, pour one out for Rainbow Curve. And then, so we tried to make a birch beer / root beer, and it tastes off too. I think there's not enough birch or maybe not enough wintergreen. And so we're going to try and salvage at least that batch. But we do quite a bit of recipe testing because the last thing I want to do is put out a video and teach y'all how to do something wrong. So I would rather dump 10 gallons worth of bad root beer than tell you this is how to make bad root beer. But eventually we'll make good root beer. Someday.
That's the hope.
It'll cost us $1,000 to get to the perfect recipe, but once we do, or you just drink A&W. It's fine. We have, in Oklahoma, we have Round Barn root beer.
From Pops.
From Pops. Pops is it's not historic. It's not historic at all. They pretend to be historic, but they have great food, and they're in a historic part of our state. That's not wrong. Pops is like,
Route 66.
it's on Route 66. Pops is trying to, they're like, no, we've been here for a while, and no, it was like 10 years. It's been out there. But Pops is great. Their food is great. Their French fries used to be better. They've changed recipe, or probably changed frozen vendors. But they serve Round Barn root beer, which is great. And they also have Catoosa cream soda. Catoosa holds a special place in my heart. They've got a blue whale up there. All right, that is wonderfully mixed. And I'm just going to take this big sticky spoon and throw it on my big sticky floor. We'll be done with that. Okay, so now we need mas agua. So we're going to take this up to 5 gallons, probably, most definitely.
I have a procedural question.
Yeah.
Could you not have just taken the lid off of the sanitizer and put the spoon in
I could have, but so this sanitizer can go back into any of these number of empty jugs that I'm going to create. This creates the ability for me to dunk stuff in there if I want to.
Got it. All the dunking.
And, make a mess while I'm at it. It's an important part of this night. So, water goes in. And like I was trying to say, we're going to try and take this up to 5 gallons. I'm not super worried about headspace in here because I don't think that there are a lot of solids that we're going to have to worry about. And so my goal is mostly to hit the right gravity reading on this, which Jack Keller says that he prefers a gravity that's just under 1.1, so like 1.09, sorry. We'll try and get it into that range. But I'm not going to add any added sugar to this or any added maple syrup to this. So we'll just see kind of when we get there what we hit. But this is an experiment, so I'm not super concerned about nailing it. So you're probably wondering what this is up here. It's not part of today's experiment. It is a peach mead that you have seen on the channel. This was mead made with 30 pounds of peaches, and it's ready to bottle. And because I am now down a carboy, how many carboys do we have in here right now? 4? There's one back there. 5?
Oh, wait. 2, 4, 6.
We have 6 carboys. I'm down a carboy, and I need a carboy because I've got more stuff to start. And one is being taken up by what may or may not end up as our April Fool's video. So this peach mead hopefully is going to get bottled this weekend. And so it's sitting up here. It came, actually we've got 2 more. We've got 8 carboys. There's 2 back here. I keep some of the carboys behind the backdrop back here to keep the sunlight off of them. So anyway, the point of that is this is going to go into bottles to hopefully be ready by summer. I moved it up here so that way anything that was in the bottom could settle because there's a sparkleoid cake in there and it got kicked up. It's not a very firm cake for whatever reason, so I just want to make sure it settles before we bottle it. Okay, mas agua. We are so close. We have a lot of projects coming up on the channel. Where we've got currently in the hopper, we've got a canned video of the buckwheat braggot that we make. And I say that it's a braggot. I consider it more of a mead because there's only a pound of malt in the braggot, and it is there to contribute residual sweetness. The malt that we use for that is called honey malt, and honey malt is a very flavor forward malt. The first time I made the recipe, I used 2 pounds in the mash, and it came out just, it was not good. It probably should have been dumped, but it was, David and I consumed it anyway. But it was very malt forward and not in a good way. It wasn't like malt heavy. It had a honey malt specific flavor, which is very grassy. It's, well, not grassy, hay-like. It's like that aroma you get when you're on a hay ride in the fall. And so you only want a little bit of that. The benefit is there are non-fermentable sugars in there that tastes kind of like honey. So when you get the balance just right, honey malt can give a honey character to a braggot. And so that recipe is actually buckwheat honey, wildflower honey, that 1 pound of honey malt that is mashed for an hour, and then a couple of Centennial hops additions in a boil. And it's literally like my favorite thing. So we're going to teach y'all how to make that. So that's coming up. We've got the root beer project that seems to be ever ongoing. And then we had consulted with the YouTubes about what to do with our cherry mead. And so we've got some plans for how to incorporate y'all's comments into finishing off that cherry mead. So I'm kind of excited for that. I'm really leaning toward the addition of chocolate. So I think that would be super cherry chocolate. Okay, so the goal is to get this about up to there. A little bit lower probably, so we have room for our yeasty beasties. Sam the Wonder Dog has joined us again. Sam is a rescue pit bull, aka Staffordshire Terrier. Is that right? Theoretically. Sam was hanging out in the parking lot of the Oklahoma City Zoo while we were there for a Samantha Crane concert one night. And so Sam was drinking a Starbucks and was very food insecure. And so we were able to, with the help of some others, lure her into our car with some dog food. We got her checked. She didn't have a chip. She didn't have tags. So Sam became our brew dog. Okay, we got to mix this up one more time.
The dunking.
Huh? Yes, all the gratuitous dunking. You get me. How's the chat going?
No new activity.
No new activity.
Yeah.
What are y'all brewing right now? What projects do the Doin the Most crowd have in the hopper right now? Curious about that. One more big stir. I'm curious to how this must is going to taste. I'm a little bit curious to taste it before we pitch the yeast.
Will anything drop out of it?
Yeast?
Yeah, I guess,
Yeah. In case y'all couldn't hear, Anna was asking if anything was going to drop out of here. And interestingly enough, you can see through, you may not be able to see through it. I can see through the carboy. Like from this angle, I can see the bottom of the carboy. So it's pretty clear, which I'm guessing that the maple syrup was filtered, or the sap was filtered prior to the syrupizing process. I think that's the official term, syrupizing. But yeah, the yeasty beasties will drop out of here, and the tannin won't dissolve all the way either. So, okay. Now I'm curious about doing an apple juice based maple wine, or I guess that's an Acer Glen, if we're just making up terms. So apple juice washes are always, or musts, I should say. I said wash because I do also do apple jack, which we've got a video coming on eventually if we can ever get our deep freeze cleaned out. Applejack is made through a fractional freezing process, and there's a lot of science to it, but basically it involves freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing with some intermediary steps. And so I've got that. But yeah, and apple-based musts are always on point.
So Andrew says peach melomel.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Like a sizer, but with all peach.
Oh, really?
That's what he says.
That sounds amazing.
Strawberry melomel. And in secondary, I have a traditional and a black briar mead. And in parentheses, it says Skyrim.
Yeah.
Mikey face emoji.
Yeah, nice. So I'm curious on Skyrim things. Anna's getting Animal Crossing today, and I've realized at some point, if UPS ever arrives, at some point I'd like to get Skyrim for Switch, and so I'd like your thoughts or advice if that's even a good idea. But I'm into those like open world type games with lots of side quests, the things that distract you from actually like Grand Theft Auto is the thing I grew up on. I'm curious how he said it was a strawberry melomel.
There's a peach melomel, which is like a sizer, but with all peach, and a strawberry melomel.
Yeah, I'm curious about the strawberry. I did a strawberry wine once years ago, and it was so bad. It spent, I think, almost 3 years in bulk aging and just never got good. And eventually I tried the tried and true of adding strawberry extract to it, and I added 3 bottles of strawberry extract, and it still never tasted like strawberries. And so that my friend Michael and I, Michael has left this world at this point. Michael was a moonshiner, and so we made the most out of that strawberry wine in one very long day in an undisclosed location in Oklahoma. All right, so this is our yeast, QA23. Michael was an interesting guy. He was an old hippie turned businessman, and literally you can listen to this guy for hours. It's just full of stories and full of brilliance. He was an amazing woodworker and taught me quite a few things about woodworking. All right, so our yeast is now in. We are ready to ferment. Did I get everything from the recipe? Let's check that out. Maple syrup, wine tannin, water to 5 gallons. The fermento will start in tomorrow, and we've got our QA23 yeast in there. Cool. Well, we need to put an airlock on this. Usually I will ferment open, so meaning I will put a paper towel and a rubber band around here and just let it do its thing, let it breathe for a little while. And depending on how the, you know what I really need to do is take a hydrometer reading. Depending on how the fermentation goes, I may or may not switch to fermenting open, but for now I'm going to use an airlock hydrometer. So, this is where the fun begins. And see the dipping. It's so good for the dipping. She can really get in there.
I just think that it probably would have fit inside of...
It might have, but you wouldn't get this really robust level of control over the sanitization if you were just trying to go into the mouth of a jug. I really feel like...
Because, like...
No, this is going to catch on. This is...
Yeah.
So this is the next big thing in homebrewing technology.
Got it.
Okay. So the hydrometer goes in, and let's see where we're at. So a lot of folks will use a graduated cylinder for this, which requires a wine thief to remove some and fill up the graduated cylinder and do it in there, and then they throw that out. Like they throw the wine or mead out, and this has been sanitized. Most everything in here is sterile. I'm not really concerned about popping this in here, and I'm going to be straight with you. Most intermediate to advanced level mead and winemakers that are making this stuff at home will generally just pop it in here. Now, if you were making beer, I could see being less inclined to put your hydrometer directly into your carboy, because beer, being a slower ferment and a lower alcohol, can be more susceptible to infection. but I can almost guarantee that this maple wine is going to be half done fermenting by Monday. And so there's going to be enough alcohol in there that it's going to outplay any potential pathogen that may have been riding on my sanitized hydrometer.
Llama Chili says, I might adopt that idea, and I don't know if they're referring to the way you're using the hydrometer or...
Almost definitely not. It's terrible.
Sanitizer bucket.
Oh, this? Yeah. I was going to say, this is not best practice. This is what I do because I'm very comfortable with my sanitization practices. We are at 1.072. 1.072. Which gives us just under 10% alcohol. So we are right about where we wanted to be. Praise be.
The jug, they clarified.
Yeah, the jug. This is solid. Like I said, you can pour this back into one of these and store it. So we're using Starzan here as our sanitizer. Starzan's got a pretty long shelf life, as long as it's in a sealed container. Just give it a nice shake before you open it back up the next time. Or like our tips and tricks video, you can put it in a spray bottle, and as long as that's got a nice seal, maybe with some plumber's tape to make sure that it's nice and sealed up, and it'll last for quite a while on the shelf. So if you're really careful. I don't think I've got my Starzan bottle in here anywhere. If you're really careful, you can make a Starzan bottle last forever. The one I bought is, I think, 2 years old, and it's one of the ones that's about like this, $25, and it's still a third full. So we use Starzan for that. And interestingly, there was a conversation on the homebrewing sub the other day about whether or not Starzan could kill coronavirus. And a molecular biologist jumped in to talk through the anatomy. I guess you would call it anatomy. Viruses aren't alive, right? They're...
I think they...
Are they living creatures? Because they have a different... I think they're RNA based. I don't know. Anyway.
No, viruses are not living things according to virology.ws.
Viruses are not living things. But they can be I guess neutralized would be the word. Anyway, apparently Starzan, when properly mixed, is the right pH to break down the envelope that surrounds coronavirus, therefore exposing coronavirus to the elements and thus neutralizing it. They've recommended that anything that you're sanitizing with a properly mixed Starzan, to leave it on for 5 minutes wet, and that should be enough to sterilize. So don't take it from, I'm not recommending that you go wipe your house down in Starzan, but apparently in a pinch, according to the scientist, it's a thing you could do if you had to. And I guess the cool thing about that is, salud. I guess the cool thing about that is a little bit goes a long way. You could mix up 5 gallons of Starzan, put it under an airlock, and you'd have sanitizer forever. You know, there's a run on hand sanitizer down at the store, but you could just go to your local homebrew shop and make your own. Okay, so I've waved this hydrometer around enough. So you got that recorded, 1.072. We are going to... it's on the YouTube video. I won't forget it, right? We're going to sanitize our silicone stopper. This is a 2-piece silicone bung. If you could see that, it's got 2 pieces. It's got a breathable valve that is held down with pressure, and it fits right into the neck of your carboy. Gas can escape, but nothing else can get in. We've got a whole video on these. You should check that out. These are amazing. They cost like $7, but you don't have to use water to top them up. And I really feel like I should own stock in this company for how much I evangelize about silicone bungs. Some folks on the internet, liars, will say that these don't hold a good valve. They certainly do. Evidence for that is... if you've got a fermenting product and you're like, well, I wonder if it's fermenting or not, if you shake it and swirl it a little bit, the air pressure will be enough coming out that this will actually have a whistling sound coming out of it. because it's escaping just enough through that valve. These are great. These are awesome. Trust them. I've aged a blackberry Merlot under one for 2.5, almost 3 years, I think. And it worked just fine. These are great. Use them. They're awesome. Okay, so that's all mixed up. We've got a potential alcohol content of just under 10% alcohol. And I will put, again, on the screen the recipe that we used for this, so you can screenshot that. Maybe follow along with us at home. And if you've got other ideas for things that you'd like to see live streamed, you know how to reach us. We are on Instagram at Doin the Most OK. Our website is dointhemost.org. And we will keep y'all updated on our Instagram and on our YouTube community page with what's going on with this maple wine. And we look forward to sharing the progress with you all and eventually sharing a nice tasting video and showing you what we all made together. So we really appreciate you joining us here, and we will see you next time on Doin the Most.